Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our session today on the new era of automation. We're going to cover quite a lot in this session if we can, so pre-warning to our fabulous panelists. And we're going to be talking about labor markets, automation, and technology, and how they all come together. And obviously, this isn't a new topic. We've all been here many times before in history. Back from the Industrial Revolution and the Luddites, back to the age of computers and innovation and automation, all through the post-Second World War era. And labor markets have been in flux now for quite a while. We saw significant shifts in the 90s and 2000s with trends like globalization and automation and the rise of trade and what that did to local labor markets. And then obviously we had the pandemic a few years ago, which we sort of saw as a once-in-a-generation shock to the labor market. And here we are a couple of years later talking about the threats that AI and automation might have to the workforce, but indeed also the augmentation, the opportunities, and hopefully we'll get to dig into some of that in our session this morning. I'm delighted to have such a great panel with me this morning, and such a trio of experts to talk about all these fields. If I just sort of introduce them, we have Josh, who is the CEO of Mindstone, which is an AI coach that turns everyday reading into learning. And Josh also hosts one of the biggest AI meetups in London, if I'm not mistaken. So really keen to hear all about that as well, and the insight. And then we've got Anna, and Anna is the co-founder and director at the Institute of the Future of Work, which is an independent research institution exploring how new technologies are transforming work and transforming lives. And then finally, we've got Elliot, who is the CEO of Salt, a leading digital recruitment agency with offices all across the world. And we'd love to get your experience, not just of the UK, but actually that global perspective as well, as we talk about this. So we're going to cover a few topics, but before we start digging into a few questions, I'd love to get some sort of initial framing thoughts and reflections from each of the panelists on this wide question of AI and automation, and any particular angles you're interested in, and then we'll unpack this in more detail in conversation. But perhaps, Josh, if I start with you for any sort of initial opening remarks.
Okay. Yep. So happy to start. So I guess I'm on the spectrum where, as much as we talk about AI today, I still actually think that we are not taking it seriously enough, even though half of this entire event probably just talks about it. But the impact, the mix between the impact and how much time we're dedicating towards it, I think is still not enough. And I think one of the biggest things is that it's automating a whole bunch of skills that we thought initially were going to be the last ones to be automated. And so everything that we've built up as a society in terms of how we help people live, train, learn, those infrastructures have been built up to learn specific skills, to teach specific skills, and they are exactly the ones that are getting automated, and the things that are going to be useful in the future are actually not taught in the right way. People don't really know how to learn, and I think as a society, how we navigate that shift is going to be extremely important over the next 2 years, not 10 years, but very soon.
Yeah, scary timelines, 2 years. Anna?
There are a lot of dramatic headlines at the moment, and a lot of talk about existentialist risk, drama. But we have known that LLM are coming for a while, and we know a lot already about the type of impacts and the risks that we're seeing at the moment very sharply in the workplace. We know that they affect access to work, the nature of work itself, the quality of work, which leads to well-being, health, the way we communicate with each other, our types of business models already. And so it's important to think about the fact that it is perhaps accessibility and speed and attention that makes us at the moment all think about more sharply governance, best practice, and responsibility too. I'm looking forward to sharing later on some results of a new national survey to trailing those results, which shows about the level of cognitive as well as physical automation, and the way in particular that now we need to think much much faster with much more of a spotlight on small companies and SMEs across the country and across the world.
Thanks, Anna. And yeah, we'd love to hear more about that research as we get into it. And finally, Elliot?
So I actually put my hand up to talk about mental health and well-being in the workplace, but I understand a chap called Stephen Bartlett covered that yesterday. So I'm more than happy to input from a global recruitment perspective in terms of what we're seeing in terms of talent in the new era of automation. The question asked at the beginning there in terms of, are we worried about AI taking our jobs? If we look back at the last 70 odd years of AI being spoken about, we've seen a wave of optimism, of depression, anxiety, hope, dreams, and fear all be mixed in terms of what is AI going to do. I think we're sitting in a place now where AI is a beautiful connection point between humans and all this data that we've been collecting over the last 20 years. So I sit here not worried about it from a sort of recruitment perspective, from a global talent perspective. I think it's going to enhance what we do and how we do things, and I think it's allowing for more emotional intelligence, more connection within a workplace, rather than people sitting behind desks doing very automated jobs, not talking, not interacting. So I think it's going to be a really positive thing for the workplace and global talent.
Yeah, there's a really interesting point there around the quality of jobs as well, right? We often talk about the era of automation as being a pure quantitative field about how many jobs will be lost and how many will be created, but actually it will change jobs themselves, not just reduce or add, and that quality of jobs will become really important. I'd like to start first talking just briefly about the technology itself and the capability of the technology to be able to actually automate and have a real impact on labor markets. And Josh, perhaps if I turn to you on this, given one, you're using the technology for the app that you're building and the product that you guys build, and also obviously your experience with the meetups and being a central figure in the AI community, just how capable is the technology in the workplace? And also, you mentioned earlier about timelines in 2 years and 10. How quickly do you think this is all moving?
So I think there are two parts. One is the capability of the technology, and the other part of how easy is it to use today that you actually that the majority of people can access it. I think the capability of the technology is really, really good. It's able to do much more than most of the things we talk about. It goes way beyond producing copy and stuff like that. So to give you a direct example, part of what we do, we are now able to automatically identify which skills are trained in any digital resource anywhere. Not something I would have imagined being able to do even a year ago. Then on the practical side, if you're slightly technical, it starts to become useful today. To give you a direct example, there are about 500 speakers at the conference here. I have an AI agent that crawled all of the profiles, and I gave the agent the types of people that I would like to meet, and it then gave me the 5 people that I should try to talk to whilst I'm at this conference. Normally that would have taken a week or so, crawling through profiles. Now it took about 25 minutes. So these tools exist today, you can use them. You have to be slightly technical to use them today though, because I don't think everyone would be able to do that. But our meetups are now the 400 people are turning up every month in person to try and figure out, okay, how do we use it tomorrow? Yeah. So I think the need is there, and the people do want to see how to apply it.
And do you see the shift in capability developing over time? So obviously the mark between GPT-3, which OpenAI released, and GPT-4 was pretty huge. Lots of rumors going around about what GPT-5 will look like. Yeah. What do you think this looks like in terms of scaling?
So I think there are two parts of scaling here. There's an enormous amount of unexploited potential in GPT-4 itself. I think creatively using what already exists can at least, there are 2 or 3 orders of magnitude bigger of the types of tasks it can actually produce. It's just that everyone's trying to figure out how to use this. Don't forget, this was early this year that GPT-4 came out. It takes teams a little bit of time to figure out how to use the technology. It then takes them another time lag to figure out how to incorporate it in their own products. We're only just now getting to the point where these products are coming to market. So you're going to have that as kind of the first big accelerant. And then on top of that, I indeed think that the new models that are coming out in the next 6 months will likely be beyond what GPT-4 is able to do now. Whether that ends up being GPT-5 or it ends up being a new Llama model that goes beyond what GPT-4 is able to do, there's still a lot of improvement potential there.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at previous waves of technology, the time it takes for people to adopt them is actually quite slow. And whilst this has been extraordinary, and ChatGPT had 100 million users within 2 months, it does still take time. And we are still like very early in this AI revolution, so I'm sure there is lots to come. Anna, from a sort of research perspective, how do you think AI will impact what you do, or what you think researchers more generally can do?
Well, going to perhaps our research itself, it's important what Josh has said, important to think, of course, about displacement. But we're really trying to shift, to reframe, if you like, the debate about automation from substitution to the other types of automation impact that you see. And in particular, the potential to augment human skills, which needs a massive shift, across policy, firms, investment, and civil society as well. So thinking about other types of automation impacts, our research is showing that it's also about job creation. It's high and low discretion automation, that it can be intensify your work or not, telepresence, matching. There are all these other dimensions that we need to really get under the bonnet of before we can begin to think about what's going to happen in the future, which we cannot predict. It's not predetermined. It will depend on the key choices that we make now, design, development, and implementation, and also the risks that we ascertain now, and how we respond to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And Elliot, we've been talking about, obviously, the capabilities of the technology already, what exists today. What are you seeing in recruitment? I guess recruitment is probably one of the most leading indicators to sort of see what's going to happen to labour markets, 6 months, 12 months' time. What are you seeing on the ground?
So what am I seeing in terms of digital skills, or the impact on the recruitment industry?
On the impact of firms' recruitment. So how are their plans changing in this era of AI? Are they changing their labour models? Are they trying to recruit certain types of workers more than others? Are certain jobs being displaced already? Are you seeing any of that already in any of the data?
Yeah, so my genesis into recruitment in 2004 was working on the harmonisation of billing systems at what is now Virgin Media, NTL as it was back in the day, and that was pulling all their customer data from phone lines, telephony, broadband, and bringing it all together, or cable, and bringing it all together. So I've seen continuous waves. I then worked in ERP, BI, and CRM, saw the whole sort of .NET revolution, the open source revolution, BI, data warehousing, then allowing for an e-commerce market because we had the data for a buyer and seller's market. And then I guess what we're sitting on now is where big data really started creeping in, I guess around 2012, 2013, and all these huge big data sets were being built. And that's where we are now with artificial intelligence and machine learning. We have all this data to sit upon. So once again, we're just seeing a shift in jobs. I was taking business analysts and project managers out of banks during the GFC and placing them into pre-sales roles in e-commerce because they knew high transactional systems. So people's skill sets have always been able to evolve with the next wave of technology. So, all the great software engineers out there right now, they'll be called AI software engineers, and AI will be stuck on the front of many job titles, as it always has been, as like with the product revolution, as with the big data revolution.
And do you see any difference currently between the UK and any of the other markets that you're operating in? Are trends moving quicker in other places, or any differences you see geographically?
I think within technology and creative roles, the trends have been very consistent across the world. We see the redundancies from the big tech companies, and you could say that is to then shift investment into AI. Because you look at the billions that have been invested in AI since those redundancies, have we just been shifting investment here to investment over there? I'd say there's always markets that buck trends. India is almost its own bubble right now. The Middle East has been very consistent this year versus UK, Europe, and North America. And South Africa as well has been very consistent here compared to some other markets.
Yeah, and Anna, you've been doing a lot of research on the firms that are automating and what that sort of looks like from a sort of slightly more macro perspective. Are you able to talk a bit more about what we're actually seeing in the data in terms of automation and firms and what people's intentions are?
I can give some headlines now, but the report will be launched next Wednesday. Do come along, do track it. In this big firm level survey that we've done, 79% of firms are deploying AI and automation technologies for physical tasks and cognitive tasks. So for the first time, the cognitive tasks are as much as the physical ones, as this group may have anticipated, but there's not been lots of data on it. And so the areas that have really changed and pulled out by that in that survey, as far as percentages go, are the cognitive tasks and the SMEs. I mean, actually, the really interesting stuff is also about what leads to better outcomes. And how the kinds of things that we're beginning to talk about, sort of readiness, sort of infrastructure for readiness, real investment in people, and thinking about in advanced job quality mediates better outcomes. So keep an eye out for that. More coming very, very, very soon.
And is there much of a difference between sectors? You talk about 79% of firms already automating or think about automating. That feels like that's pretty broad across the sort of whole economy. Do you anticipate there being much difference between sectors, or do you think this is the type of general purpose technology which is basically going to impact everyone?
Well, there are impacts across all sectors. They do, of course, vary. I guess more widely, our work is tending to suggest that that the impacts on different groups and people varies hugely. And again, this goes back to how you're doing it, how it's being designed, how it's being deployed, how it's being monitored, and in particular, whether or not the impacts are being forecasted and assessed in the way that we suggest is particularly important. Thinking about work, I suppose, not just as important in its own right, as the source of most people's material and non-material benefits, but also as a kind of golden thread between your everyday experience, what's going on in your firm, your community, and the economy as a whole.
Yeah. And Josh, what are you seeing in terms of both the firm that you run yourself and actually just more widely in the community in terms of automation and in terms of how quickly firms might be looking to automate tasks and change jobs?
Yes, I see it happening quite quickly. So at a personal level, I've reviewed our hiring strategy based on the fact that we think we can do more with less. I know many other founders in the same position who have revised how they're thinking about it. If I think about direct use cases, right, there's Ada and Ultimate. They don't try to just enhance your customer support, but their entire pitch is it is entirely automated, and so you are talking to a large language model. When I get an NDA today, it used to be I would forward that to my lawyer. Now I'd feed it into ChatGPT to figure out if the NDA seems somewhat equal on both sides. I recently signed my first investment deal that had a convertible note written by ChatGPT. So all of these things, I mean, they're actually happening right now. The thing is, there's a lagging effect in terms of I realize I'm on the extreme end of adoption of these tools, but they're all coming. Like, the capability exists, just about how does it spread through society at this point. And that's where I think the speed is a big thing, because a few smaller firms end up being able to do much more than their competitors might. And then once they end up realizing, okay, we are behind on this, there is a real economic incentive for everyone else to catch up very quickly.
Yeah, and the examples you gave there were very broad brush, investment memos to contracts and NDAs and all sorts of other things. In terms of your firm again, or indeed just more generally in the industry, do you see that being broad brush? And where is safe? Where is an arena that is just not going to be touched by these things, if such a place exists?
So I do think that there is absolutely such a place that exists. So there are quite a few studies that have kind of come through. And so the interesting thing is the skills that seem to matter most in the future are the human skills. So I had one of the things that I think is interesting to look at is comparing what happened with software engineering in the last 15 years to what might happen to a bunch of other industries over the next kind of two to three. Software engineering 15 years ago, you would be hired because you knew because of a specific language of code that you would understand. Like, you were a Java developer, you would get a job because you knew how to code in Java. today, your ability to code actually doesn't factor that much in the equation anymore. Yes, you're assumed to understand how to code, but if I asked the biggest group of CTOs in London, what are the things you look for when you're hiring an engineer today? And they are the ability to learn, the ability to collaborate, and the ability to solve problems. The ability to code didn't even make the top 5, which is very, very interesting. And so there's a similar thing that's happening here with across other industries, which is that from an engineering perspective, today when you're building, you are confronted with millions of different libraries. So the role of an engineer is often just picking different libraries, putting them together, and then trying to make sure they collaborate. Well, with AI, I think that type of work is coming to a lot more industries. If you think about these different AIs as vertical solutions that do specific tasks, the human task ends up being taking 5 of them, combining them, and figuring out how to get to a better result. Then plugging that into an organization, making sure that you collaborate with everyone else around you that is trying to get to a common goal. And then your ability to quickly learn and understand what are the tools available to you in the first place become really important. Right, so those 3 human skills, the ability to learn, the ability to collaborate, and the ability to own and solve a problem, those are going to be the key things that are going to be useful. And the people that really lean into making sure those are the skills they develop will have a really, really bright future ahead because they can leverage all this technology. And that's one of the key things that I would urge everyone to think about, because if those are the levers that help us be useful and be productive going forward, now is the time to start to really think about them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I don't know from a historical perspective, if you have thoughts from, automation has been here and we've been through so many different cycles. Some things that Josh is talking about do seem totally different to what we've seen before. How different do you think this automation cycle is to what we've seen previously? Be that, when computers came or the machines came or factories changed. Do you think there are lessons from there we can learn for today?
There are always lessons from history. You kind of have to start with that and what you know, as we've already said. But perhaps looping round to recruitment specifically and thinking about that, and also what you said about capabilities and potential. There's in the recruitment context, to use this as, a window to answer your question, there's huge potential to understand people's capabilities and access different people in a different way. There's huge potential to understand our patterns of behavior and patterns of resource in a way that has sometimes obstructed the best and the most equitable results before. But is this happening, and how does this happening? It reminds me of a piece of work we did on the auditing tools used by recruitment companies, done by Logan Graham. In conjunction at the IFOW, which found it was in 2020, so it was an early thing to do, but it was finding that the terms and the concepts used were very, very different across the auditing tools. That US concepts that were not alien, but were not the same as UK laws were being imported in, and no one seemed to be aware of any of this. So there you are, as a quick whip round, the good, the past, the future, and what we should begin to do about it.
Yeah, Elliot, thoughts from a recruitment angle, and then from what Anna was just talking about.
So look, just with a couple of things that we've been speaking about there, and just skills generally, a lot of jobs are part art, part science. And, the artistry part of it, is emotional intelligence, it's building trust, it's empathy, it's compassion. It's built upon skills of people that previously, might have studied sociology or psychology. And they're now being brought into a world where perhaps they were in fear of what they could do from a technical point of view. Data entry, use of systems, how scientific and mathematical their mind was. Well, now the technology, the automation is an enabler for those things. So actually we can have people with more emotional intelligence, more social skills, working with data and help make decisions that are going to impact many, many people, rather than it being so scientifically driven without the artistry side of things as well. So going back to what I said at the beginning, this is the bit I'm excited about, because I think we're going to flood the workplace, as we're seeing in floods, people returning to the office, more collaboration, more innovation, more ideas, more thinking. I asked my son in the car on the way to football on Sunday, what jobs do you think are going to be impacted by AI? The first one he said was referees. He said referees always make bad decisions. He said, whether the ball is across the line or on the line. I know we've got VAR and stuff, but we don't have that across all the games. So he thinks all referees are now going to be AI. And the next one he said was cooking. He said, we're going to link all these things that we use, ordering the food. It will then cook the food as well. And it reminded me of the Jetsons. I'm probably a bit older than a few people here, maybe the same age, but some of you remember the Jetsons. And I think they had this kind of microwave thing that, brought the ingredients and cooked the food. So I think we can have fun with how we think about AI. I think we can, move past the distressed movies that we've seen over the years, be it war games and Terminator and all the other things that robots and AI are going to do to us. And we can use it as a comfort. I love the concepts of, personal assistance, life coaching, all these things that it can do, especially people working in smaller businesses or people that work alone, that they can have a tool to enhance what they do. So this is the stuff we need to be thinking about and talking about, rather than watching the movies that are scaring us to death.
Yeah, quite.
And just as a quick PS, so that these are all things we could do with these capabilities in the with big data, if we are aware and we remember that these data sets reflect our past patterns of behavior and resource. And unless we get under the bonnet of that too, we will project that unthinkingly into our future.
Yeah, that's quite right. And I guess that's sort of a one-shot game as well, because if we don't start with that and we don't actually sort of figure out what the right data sets to use, and then we just build and build on top of that, the mistakes of the past will always feed into what the systems of the future take out. So it's a very good point to add as well. Elliot, just coming back to skills. I mean, Josh talked to us earlier around the skills of the future, and actually being less about technical skills and being much more about adaptability and the ability to learn and the ability to be creative. If you were giving advice to people in the audience today, perhaps people early in their careers or students, about what skills they should be trying to build to deal with what workplace will look like in 3 years' time to help them find a job, what advice would you give, and what specific skills do you think people should be looking to build?
So I think we've always injected in schools anxiety within children that they've got to be good at maths. I think kids, whether we look at neurodiversity, whatever angle we look at it from, some kids just aren't as with numbers as other kids are. So, my philosophy within schools, and at SALT we do a lot, we have an Educating Futures program. I sit on the board of a local academy of schools, so this is something I'm really passionate about. I think there is always enough minds out there, whether it's the future engineers, the future artists, the future dancers, the future actors. I think there's always enough of us out there to breed the new wave of jobs. I think we need to continually focus on what our hopes and dreams are and what our passions are, because some of the best tech companies have been built by non-technical people. They've been built by problem solvers. They've been built by people that are hugely passionate about a certain idea that they have that's going to disrupt their own hobby. So I don't think we should be manipulating skill sets and scaremongering kids into what they should be studying. I think, continually focus your hopes and dreams, but read up on what is going on in the world. We can't get away from AI as a concept, as technology as a concept. Since 2007, with the rise of the iPhone and the smartphone, we can't get away that this thing sits with us all day. It has been our personal assistant for a number of years now, whether it's counting our steps, measuring our sleep, reminding us of pings, what we have to do throughout the day. So I think as a human race, we need to embrace technology, but we shouldn't feel we have to learn a certain subject at school or study a certain thing to have a job of the future. I think there will always be jobs of the future for everyone out there.
Yeah. And Josh, you were talking before about some of those skills that sort of need to change. If we sort of take as a premise that the skills of the future are different to the skills of today, how do you think we go about addressing that from a societal perspective? Is that the responsibility of governments? Is that the responsibility of employers? Is that the responsibility of individuals to sort of take on their own learning path and think about their ambitions and sort of decide what they want to do? How do you see this?
So yeah, it's a very good question, and it's a difficult one to answer because it's such a big gap. So personally, I believe that these vertical skills are getting automated, and so a real keen ability to do math, or even just the ability to code. Coding is one of the first things that is getting automated at the moment. Like those very vertical skills, I think, are going to disappear, or at least drastically reduce in frequency. But most of our institutions today are built to teach those skills. And so like I hope we can go back to a stage where our universities actually teach the ability to be a good citizen, the ability to learn, the ability to solve problems and own them, the ability to collaborate with other people. That used to be what those forums were about. And then they got, over a long period of time, got pushed into producing these hard skills for companies, because at the end of the day, people wanted to get a job at the end of it. Well, we're now going back to the part where actually getting that job is going to be about those core skills. But that is a fundamental rethink of what these institutions do. And then the onus of skilling up the person just before their job goes either somewhere in between the individual and the employer, but also because the lifetime, the half-life of a skill goes down so much, anything I learn today is going to be entirely obsolete in 3 years. And so the idea that there is something before you join an employer where you get trained up in order to then join the workforce just doesn't really work when the skills around you are changing so rapidly. So it kind of has to be a just-in-time solution, which likely will land with the employer or the individual in an ownership way where they make sure that they are aware of the right tools at the right time.
Mm-hmm. Anna, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think just to add two slightly different points then, perhaps a way of thinking about it is more in terms of skills bundles and how they're changing. We're doing some work on that at the moment, but it's not quite ready yet, and that's a space that needs more attention. And the other thing is, in a way, the AI and the skills debate can get quite narrow, and so we need to really open it up. In particular, thinking more about capabilities than specific skills, and definitely not get fixated on tech skills only, although of course that's very important, and think about it in terms of bringing more people into the conversation, and different types of capabilities, and building capacity to avoid the kind of polarization and exacerbation of different types of equality that we are beginning to see, and that we will see more of if we don't do that.
And how do you see that from a policy perspective or a government perspective in terms of, do you think that then translates into direct actions that governments need to be thinking about today?
Well, I think it does. I mean, I think that conversations about, in a number of ways, and I think there are several factors that suggest that we should be moving towards thinking about harder forms of governance in conjunction with soft governance guidance and firms. And on that, knowing that and trying to think of ways of aligning, developing the best forms of regulation and governance, best practice, and supporting responsible investment, we're developing. We've got the outline already, and we're about to pilot in a new sandbox a model that could be used by those different bodies in different ways. But yeah, looping back to your question into governance, the UK we mustn't forget, the UK is really good at governance and legislation. Particularly in tech, but in other areas too, and always has been, as well as innovation. So it's kind of time to really pull those things together. I think that we're ahead of the game in a way with the principles approach. I think that's really good. That's a way of future-proofing as well as it possibly can be, but we shouldn't be afraid of it. There's a need for clarity, there's a need for direction, there's no reason why we can't think about governance as we always have done, by setting, by setting high-level principles, setting some red lines, things that you have to do, incentivizing people to think about the things that will have the biggest impact, and also are connected with the better outcomes. Setting up structures for ongoing monitoring and assessment, and letting the detail come with regulators, by sector, and in a more dynamic way with firms as we go.
Yeah, and I mean, this change of skills will no doubt also lead to the creation of job opportunities as well as obviously disruption in sort of certain labor markets.
Absolutely.
And Elliot, you talked previously about that sort of optimistic case that, you know, there will always be jobs and people will always move in different places, and skills will always be adaptable and people will be able to sort of change. In terms of thinking about what the industries of the future look like, so if you're sort of taking a 5-10 year view and thinking about where the jobs are going to come from, are there areas that you think are particular growth areas that will be sort of benefit from the technology? And even though some areas that might be automated, the sort of the augmentation and actually just the increase in demand will mean net, those will be big drivers of jobs. Are there particular industries that you think about?
Yeah, so if I think about our journey in digital, initially you're looking at the mainstream industries. You know, it was e-commerce, shopping platforms, it was the travel industry, it's been media and entertainment. Whereas now, if you look at where the big spend is, and certainly what we're doing across Latin America, certainly what we're doing, Pan-Africa, you've got things like agribusiness, you've got research into sustainability, you've got more and more, jobs coming out of medtech and health tech, what they're doing with the solar industry in North Africa, as an example, these industries are going to be springing jobs everywhere. And, 10 years ago when I first started, really looking heavily into diversity and inclusion, the commercial factor behind that was that there was going to be this mass skill shortage. Well, we're 10 years on since then, and all the big tech companies have been, laying off people left, right, and centre for the last 15 months. So there clearly isn't too many people on the market to facilitate the jobs out there. I think where globally there's going to be a future, I think, is helping emerging countries, raise their GDP. It's countries Pan-Africa, it's giants like India, it's countries like Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, where you're really going to see a rise of skills, and that's going to allow companies with the use of technology now to recruit from all over the world. So company starts up in London, no longer needs to hire people within the M25. They can directly look at people in Brazil, people in South Africa, and the technology, the security, the compliance, yeah, it's always going to need work, it's always going to be evolving, but it's there now for businesses to grow in a truly global way. And I think that's going to enhance all of us in terms of a skills and talent point of view, because we all need to continually raise our games. It's raising the education standards, it's raising how we train and develop people. I can certainly say from a recruitment perspective, coming out of COVID, the market was so busy. Were we as good as we could have been on learning and development? Did we onboard people in the best way? No, we left gaps. The market was so busy. People walked in, they had so many jobs to walk into that, there was gaps on L&D. So I think it's a refresh for all companies just to look at how they're educating their people, how they're training their people, and it's also going to require more closer relationships with schools, universities, colleges. So we're thinking about those grassroots skills. So we're, investing in more talks in schools and educating the kids on what the future looks like.
Yeah, that really holistic approach, you sort of need it starting from the whole schools, education, college, university system, and then looking into the employers. You can't really tackle these problems just by sort of plastering at one end of the spectrum. I'm conscious of time as well. I think we've got a couple of minutes left just to wrap up. Josh, I'd be really keen to get your view on what happens if we do face heavy automation and heavy job losses. I mean, there's been lots of people talking about, universal basic income and wider social security nets and a transformation in the welfare system effectively to deal with what might happen in years to come. And obviously we've talked about different perspectives and the fact that there will be jobs created as well. But if we do end up in a scenario where in the next few years or in the next 5 years, we do see significant job losses, particularly in sectors, do you think we need to radically change the model of governance? And what do we do about those people that are left behind?
Very difficult question to answer. But I want to be clear, I'm short term a little bit pessimistic or scared. Long term, actually, I'm very optimistic. Long term, I think there's a whole lot. The only thing where I think we have a mismatch is that the speed of technology totally outpaces our ability as a society to directly react. And so there's going to be a lot of pain in that middle ground, which is why I talk about time frame of like 2 years or so. In 10 years, I think we'll be fine, or I hope we'll be fine. In terms of what we can do, I think we need to empower individuals to lean in to what is happening here. I talk a lot about suspension of disbelief in what is happening here. If you're still at the stage where you think, well, surely my job is not affected, I would incentivize everyone, and I think we as a society need to get everyone to go through a few of these exercises where they're like, okay, well, let's assume that AI can automate my job. What does that mean and what can I do with it? And actively engage with that discussion, because once you're engaging with the discussion, you can start to have it and start to look past what's happening. If you don't, you're going to get caught off guard, and that's where the problem happens.
Yeah. If you just close your eyes and bury your head in the sand, it doesn't tend to work out too well. And any sort of final thoughts on that sort of medium-term outlook and what might need to change or happen?
I think there needs to be a massive shift at all levels towards thinking and aiming for the augmentation of human capabilities, skills, and values. And that's an imperative from different perspectives. And increasingly there is, although there's not evidence isn't entirely consistent, increasingly there is evidence that approach, and we'll be producing some more, is actually also correlated with job creation, positions, and skills, as well as job quality. I think that in terms of governance, we should stop being afraid of it. We should stop thinking of it in a negative way. It should stop being seen exclusively in terms of protections, although those are important, and we'll need a few more of those, and start thinking about the benefits for that, for everybody, and societal benefits too. If we get that right. And I think that we should work together in a dynamic way. So I think in terms of the sandbox and the good work algorithmic impact assessment model that we're coming up with, there's an opportunity there, there's a real space to bring people together and work out what this might look like in practice and pilot things that can then inform the governance as it develops and the regulation in an interactive way.
Absolutely. And Elliot, final comments from you?
Final thoughts are Siri and Alexa are our friends, and it's down to us how much time we consume on technology and how we self-care. So let's embrace AI.
Amazing. I think a very optimistic note to end on, and actually quite an optimistic discussion. I think key takeaways I've certainly been taking from that is one, our need to engage with the technology and really get to grips with it and play around with it and ensure that if that is going to be the future, we do need to start dealing with it. We do need to think about how that affects our own lives and our own jobs, but also that it's not all doom and gloom. The automation cycle isn't going to come and end jobs in the next few years, or at least hopefully not anyway. And there will be opportunities, there will be changes, and it's about how we adapt to them and how we as a society adapt to them that will transform our future. With that, I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists today, to Josh, Anna, and Elliot.
Thank you. Good, guys.